When Helen Parker looked into the eyes of the crying baby's father on Flight 447, she had no idea she was staring at Lorenzo Castellano, Chicago's most powerful mafia boss, or that her simple act of kindness would mark her for death. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and survival. Tell us your city. Hit subscribe and get ready for today's story. Let's start. The piercing wails of one-year-old Marco Castellano echoed through the first-class cabin of Flight 447, causing every passenger to shift uncomfortably in their leather seats. Helen Parker had seen many distressed children during her 3 years as a flight attendant, but something about this baby's desperate cries tugged at her heart differently. The man holding the screaming infant looked nothing like the disheveled fathers Helen usually encountered. Lorenzo Castellano sat in seat 2A, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair impeccably styled despite the chaos in his arms. Silver threads at his temples suggested he was around 40, and even in distress, he commanded attention in a way that made other passengers avert their eyes respectfully. "Sir, is everything all right?" Helen approached with professional calm, though her maternal instincts were firing on all cylinders. The baby's face was red and blotchy, his tiny fists flailing as he arched his back in obvious discomfort. Lorenzo looked up, and Helen felt her breath catch. His eyes were the deepest brown she'd ever seen, framed by thick lashes that belonged in a painting. But it was the vulnerability in those eyes that stopped her cold. This powerful man was completely lost. "He hasn't stopped crying since we boarded," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying a slight rasp of exhaustion. "I think he's hungry, but he won't take the bottle. His mother always—" He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. Helen's heart constricted. A single father struggling alone. "May I?" She gestured toward the baby, and after a moment's hesitation, Lorenzo nodded. The instant Helen took Marco into her arms, something magical happened. Her voice dropped to a soft croon as she began to rock him gently. "Hey there, beautiful boy. You're okay. Mama Helen's got you." Marco's cries began to subside as Helen settled him against her shoulder, her hand making soothing circles on his back. She'd grown up helping her mother care for foster children. This came as naturally as breathing. "How did you—" Lorenzo stared in amazement as his son's breathing regulated. "He needed to be upright," Helen explained softly, continuing her gentle rocking. "Sometimes when babies are overtired and hungry, lying flat makes them panic, and he can probably sense your stress. They're little emotional sponges." She moved to the galley area, Lorenzo following closely. "Let me warm this properly," Helen said, testing the formula temperature on her wrist. Airlines never get it quite right. As she prepared the bottle with expert efficiency, Lorenzo watched her every movement. There was something different about this woman. Her blonde hair was pulled back in the regulation style, but loose strands framed her face softly. She was beautiful, but not in the artificial way he was accustomed to. This beauty came from within, from genuine care and competence. "You have children?" he asked quietly. Helen's smile faltered slightly. "No, but I helped raise 7 foster siblings. My mother believed in giving kids a safe place to land." She tested the formula again, then handed it to Lorenzo. "Try now." He should take it. Marco immediately latched onto the bottle, his eyes growing heavy as he drank. The cabin filled with blessed quiet, broken only by the gentle hum of the engines. "I can't thank you enough," Lorenzo said, his voice rough with emotion. I was starting to think I was failing him already. "Hey." Helen touched his arm gently, a gesture that sent electricity shooting through both of them. "Being a good parent means asking for help when you need it. That's exactly what you did." For the next hour, Helen found excuses to check on them. She brought extra blankets, showed Lorenzo how to position Marco for better comfort, and even held the baby while Lorenzo ate his untouched meal. Each interaction deepened their connection. Lorenzo found himself studying her laugh, the way she hummed unconsciously while rocking Marco, how she seemed to glow when the baby smiled at her. Helen discovered that beneath his intimidating exterior was a man desperately trying to navigate single parenthood, someone who spoke to his son in gentle Italian and carried photos of every milestone. "He's beautiful," Helen said, as the plane began its descent into Chicago. Marco slept peacefully in his father's arms now, completely content. "He looks like his mother," Lorenzo replied softly, then met Helen's eyes. "She died in childbirth, complications." Helen's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry." "I promised her I'd be enough for him," Lorenzo continued. Days like today make me wonder if that's possible. From what I've seen, you're already everything he needs, Helen said firmly. Love isn't about perfection, it's about showing up, even when you don't know what you're doing. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Lorenzo made a decision that would change everything. I don't suppose you'd consider having dinner with me sometime. I'd like to thank you properly. Helen hesitated. She'd had her share of wealthy passengers ask her out, usually with underlying expectations that made her skin crawl, but something about Lorenzo felt different. Dangerous, yes, but not in the way she expected. I don't usually date passengers, she said carefully. This wouldn't be a date, Lorenzo replied with a slight smile that revealed a dimple she hadn't noticed before. This would be a desperate father buying dinner for the woman who saved his sanity. At 30,000 feet, despite every professional instinct screaming warnings, Helen found herself nodding. Okay, but somewhere family-friendly. I'd like to see this little guy again. Perfect. Lorenzo handed her his business card. Simple. Expensive card stock with just his name and a phone number. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock? As Helen tucked the card into her pocket, she had no idea she'd just accepted a dinner invitation from one of the most feared men in Chicago. All she knew was that something about Lorenzo Castellano and his precious son had touched her heart in a way that felt both wonderful and terrifying. The plane landed smoothly, but as they deplaned, neither Helen nor Lorenzo could shake the feeling that their lives had just irrevocably changed course. Helen stared at her reflection in her apartment bathroom mirror, questioning her sanity for the 100th time. In 3 hours, she'd be having dinner with a complete stranger and his baby, a man who'd somehow managed to slip past every defense she'd built around her heart in a single flight. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Looking forward to tonight. Marco hasn't stopped smiling since yesterday. Lorenzo. The message was followed by a photo that made Helen's heart skip. Little Marco in a high chair, baby food smeared across his cherubic face, grinning at the camera. The sight of his joy was infectious. She texted back, "He's adorable, see you at 7. Helen chose her outfit carefully, a soft blue dress that was elegant, but not trying too hard, paired with comfortable heels, since she'd be interacting with a toddler. As she applied light makeup, her mind wandered to Lorenzo's eyes, the way they'd softened when he looked at his son, the controlled strength in his hands. The restaurant Lorenzo had chosen surprised her. Instead of the expensive downtown establishment she'd expected, he'd picked Bambino's, a family-owned Italian place in Little Italy, known for its welcoming atmosphere and patience with small children. Helen arrived 5 minutes early, nervous energy making her fidget with her purse strap. She spotted them immediately. Lorenzo sat at a corner table, Marco contentedly babbling in a restaurant high chair, playing with what appeared to be a very expensive set of toy keys. Lorenzo stood as she approached, and Helen's breath caught again. He traded his business suit for dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. The casual look made him somehow more approachable, though no less commanding. "You look beautiful," he said simply, pulling out her chair. "Thank you." Helen settled beside Marco, who immediately reached for her with chubby hands. "Hey there, handsome, did you miss me?" Lorenzo watched with fascination as his son lit up in Helen's presence. Marco had always been wary of strangers, but with Helen he was all smiles and reaching arms. "He's been asking for you," Lorenzo said, settling back into his seat. Well in his way. "Every time someone blonde walked past our window today, he got excited." Helen's heart melted a little more. "You've been together all day." "I took the week off work," Lorenzo replied. "We're still figuring each other out." As they ordered, Helen insisted on sharing a plate of pasta so Marco could try small bites. Their conversation flowed naturally. Helen found herself captivated by Lorenzo's dry humor, the way he described learning to change diapers, like it was a military operation, his obvious devotion to his son. "What do you do for work?" Helen asked, as Marco grabbed at her napkin with sauce-covered fingers. For just a moment, Lorenzo's expression shuttered. Import-export, family business. Something in his tone suggested the topic was closed, but Helen was too charmed by Marco's antics to press. The baby was systematically destroying his dinner, getting more food on himself than in his mouth, giggling at his own mess. "He's going to need a complete change of clothes," Helen observed, wiping sauce from Marco's chin. "I came prepared." Lorenzo produced a fully stocked diaper bag with military efficiency. "Though I'm learning that being prepared and being successful are two different things with babies." "You're doing great," Helen assured him, catching Marco's spoon before it hit the floor. "Look how happy he is." It was true, Marco was babbling contentedly, alternating between trying to feed himself and reaching for Helen's jewelry. The contentment on his little face spoke volumes about his father's care. As they shared tiramisu, Marco got excited about the sweet taste and managed to smear it in his hair. Helen realized she was falling for both of them, the powerful businessman who turned to mush when his son smiled, and the baby who seemed determined to steal her heart completely. "I should probably get him home," Lorenzo said reluctantly as Marco began showing signs of tiredness. "This was supposed to be a quick thank you dinner and I've kept you for 2 hours." "I didn't mind," Helen said, surprised by how much she meant it. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed an evening this much." Lorenzo's smile was worth the admission. "Would you consider doing this again? Maybe somewhere Marco can crawl around more freely?" "I'd like that." Helen helped clean Marco's hands with wet wipes, marveling at how natural this felt. "But next time let me help cook. I make a mean homemade pasta sauce. You want to cook for us?" The surprise in Lorenzo's voice was unmistakable. "I love cooking, and I have a feeling this little guy would enjoy helping make a mess in the kitchen." As they prepared to leave, Lorenzo insisted on walking Helen to her car. Marco dozed in his stroller, worn out from his dinner adventure. "Helen," Lorenzo said, as they reached her modest Honda, "I want you to know, I don't usually do this." "Do what?" "Feel comfortable with someone so quickly. Trust someone around Marco." His expression was serious. "There's something about you that makes everything feel easier." Helen's heart fluttered. "I feel the same way, which probably makes me crazy since I barely know you." "Maybe we're both a little crazy," Lorenzo replied, stepping closer. For a moment, Helen thought he might kiss her. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sweet dreams, Helen Parker." As she drove home, Helen couldn't stop smiling. She was falling for a man and his baby with a speed that should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. What she didn't know was that Lorenzo was already having her background investigated, not out of suspicion, but out of protection. In his world, caring about someone meant ensuring their safety, and Lorenzo Castellano was already caring about Helen Parker far more than was wise. 3 days later, Helen found herself in the playground at Lincoln Park, pushing Marco on a baby swing while Lorenzo watched from a nearby bench. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that it made her chest tight with longing. "Hiya, Mama Helen," Marco giggled, even though he couldn't actually form those words yet. But his delighted squeals were clear enough. "Did he just—" Lorenzo sat up straighter. "It's probably just babbling," Helen said quickly, but her heart was racing. The way Marco looked at her, reached for her, settled immediately in her arms. It was as if he'd been waiting for her his whole short life. Lorenzo joined them at the swing set, his presence immediately calming to both Helen and Marco. "He's never taken to anyone this quickly," he said quietly. "Not even my sister, and she's been trying to win him over for months." "You have a sister?" "Sophia. She lives in New York now, married to a doctor." Lorenzo's expression softened. "She keeps threatening to move back and help with Marco, but she has her own life." Helen caught the swing gently, lifting Marco out. He immediately snuggled against her shoulder, his chubby arms wrapping around her neck. The simple gesture of trust and affection brought tears to her eyes. "You're a natural with him," Lorenzo observed. "He makes it easy." Helen pressed a kiss to Marco's dark curls. "He's such a sweet boy." They settled on a blanket Lorenzo had spread under a large oak tree. Marco crawled between them, playing with blocks while they talked. Helen learned that Lorenzo had graduated from Northwestern with a business degree, that he spoke 4 languages, that his favorite moments were early mornings when Marco woke up babbling happily in his crib. "What about you?" Lorenzo asked as Marco attempted to stack blocks with little success. "What made you become a flight attendant?" Helen hesitated. Her real answer, that she'd needed to escape her small hometown and an ex-boyfriend who couldn't take no for an answer, felt too heavy for such a perfect afternoon. "I wanted to see the world," she said instead, "and I like taking care of people." Lorenzo's perceptive gaze suggested he heard what she wasn't saying, but he didn't push. Instead, he pulled out his phone as it buzzed insistently. "Lorenzo," he answered, his voice immediately shifting to something harder, more authoritative. "What's the situation?" Helen watched his expression grow serious as he listened to whoever was on the other end. The change in his demeanor was startling. This was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Handle it. Quietly," he said finally. "And Tony, make sure there are no complications." He ended the call and looked up to find Helen watching him curiously. For a moment, something dangerous flickered across his features before his expression softened again. "Business emergency," he explained, but Helen noticed he'd moved slightly, positioning himself between her and the rest of the park. Nothing serious. Marco chose that moment to topple backward, bumping his head lightly on the ground. His face crumpled, and he let out a wail that had both adults immediately reaching for him. Helen got there first, scooping him up and checking for any real injury. "You're okay, baby boy, just a little bump." Lorenzo watched in amazement as Helen's gentle touches and soft singing quickly soothed Marco's tears. Within minutes, the baby was giggling again, reaching for Helen's earrings. "How do you do that?" Lorenzo asked. "Practice," Helen replied, then realized how that sounded. "I mean with the foster kids. You learn to read what they need." "It's more than that." Lorenzo's voice was soft. "You have a gift." Their eyes met over Marco's head, and Helen felt that now familiar flutter of attraction mixed with something deeper. She was falling in love not just with the baby, but with the man who loved him so completely. Lorenzo's phone buzzed again, this time with a text. Helen couldn't see the message, but she saw his jaw clench as he read it. "I'm sorry," he said, standing abruptly. "I need to cut this short. Something's come up that requires my immediate attention." Of course, Helen helped pack up their things, trying to ignore the sudden distance in his demeanor. The carefree father from moments before had been replaced by someone who radiated controlled danger. As Lorenzo secured Marco in his car seat, Helen noticed a black SUV that had been circling the park. 2 men in suits sat in the front seat, their attention focused on Lorenzo's location. "Lorenzo," she said carefully, "is everything all right?" He followed her gaze to the SUV, and his expression grew grim. "Everything's fine, but I think it's best if we don't see each other for a few days." Helen's heart sank. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." Lorenzo moved to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You're perfect. That's the problem." Before Helen could ask what he meant, he'd kissed her forehead softly and walked away, leaving her standing in the parking lot with more questions than answers. As his Mercedes pulled away, followed discreetly by the black SUV, Helen realized that whatever Lorenzo Castellano's business was, it wasn't import-export, and she was already too involved to walk away safely. Helen didn't hear from Lorenzo for 4 days. 4 long days of checking her phone obsessively, replaying their last conversation, and trying to understand what had gone wrong. The sudden silence felt like abandonment, especially after the connection she'd felt with both Lorenzo and Marco. On the 5th day, she was restocking the galley on a delayed flight when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Helen, it's Sofia Castellano, Lorenzo's sister." Helen's pulse spiked. "Is everything okay? Is Marco—" "They're fine physically." Sofia's voice was strained. "But I need to see you tonight if possible. There are things about my brother you need to understand." 2 hours later, Helen sat in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, across from a woman who looked like a feminine version of Lorenzo. Same dark eyes, same elegant bone structure, but with worry lines that aged her beyond her years. "My brother is an idiot," Sofia said without preamble. "He's pushing you away to protect you, but he's too stubborn to explain why." "Protect me from what?" Sofia studied Helen carefully, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. "My family, we're not in import-export, Helen. We're in a much older, more dangerous business." The words hit Helen like ice water. "What kind of business?" "The kind where people who get close to my brother sometimes end up hurt." Sofia leaned forward. "Lorenzo is the head of the Castellano family. He controls most of the organized activities on the north side." "Organized activities," Helen repeated numbly. "He's a mafia boss, Helen, one of the most powerful in Chicago." The coffee shop seemed to spin around Helen. Images flashed through her mind. Lorenzo's commanding presence, the way other passengers had averted their eyes, the black SUV, his phone call in the park. "He should have told you himself," Sofia continued. "But he's terrified that if you know who he really is, you'll run. And worse, that knowing puts you in danger." "What kind of danger?" "The kind where rival families might try to use you to get to him. The kind where federal agents might pressure you for information. The kind where your normal, safe life disappears forever." Helen's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "Why are you telling me this?" Because I've never seen my brother like this, and because Marco hasn't stopped crying since Lorenzo decided to protect you by staying away." Sophia's expression softened. "That baby needs you, Helen, and God help us all, so does Lorenzo." "I don't understand how this is real," Helen whispered. "He seemed so normal, sweet even." "He is sweet. With you and Marco." Sophia smiled sadly. "You've seen a side of him that most people don't get to witness. The man who used to read me bedtime stories, who carried me on his shoulders, who promised our dying father he'd keep the family safe. By becoming a criminal, by becoming what the family needed him to become." Sophia's voice was fierce with loyalty. "Do you know what happens to Mafia families without strong leadership? They get absorbed or eliminated. Lorenzo chose to lead so the rest of us could have choices." Helen tried to process this information, but her mind kept rejecting it. "The Lorenzo I know wouldn't hurt anyone." "The Lorenzo you know wouldn't hurt you," Sophia corrected. "He's killed people, Helen. He's ordered deaths, destroyed lives, done things that would horrify you. But he's also protected hundreds of families, kept peace between warring factions, and raised a baby alone because he promised his dying wife he'd be a good father. This is insane." "Yes, it is." Sophia reached across the table. "The question is, do you love him anyway?" Helen's breath caught. Love. She'd been avoiding that word, but hearing it spoken aloud made her realize how true it was. "I barely know him." "You know the most important parts. You know he's a devoted father. You know he's gentle with those he cares about. You know he made you feel safe and valued." Sophia squeezed Helen's hand. Squeezed. "The rest is just context." "Context?" Helen laughed bitterly. "He's a mafia boss. That's not context. That's a complete life changer. Only if you let it be." Helen stared at Sophia, seeing Lorenzo's same intense eyes in a face marked by years of loving a dangerous man. "How do you live with it? The worry, the fear. The same way you live with loving anyone, one day at a time, grateful for what you have." Sophia's smile was sad. "Love doesn't come with guarantees, Helen. It never has." As Helen walked to her car an hour later, her phone buzzed with a text from Lorenzo. "I hope you can forgive me for not being the man you thought I was. You and Marco deserved better. L." Helen stared at the message, tears blurring her vision. He was giving her an out, a clean break before things got more complicated. The smart thing would be to take it. Instead, Helen found herself typing back, "Where are you? We need to talk." The response came immediately. "It's not safe." "I don't care about safe anymore," Helen typed. "I care about the truth." A long pause, then an address in Little Italy. As Helen drove through the Chicago night toward what was either the biggest mistake of her life or the beginning of her real story, she realized that Sophia was right about one thing. Love never came with guarantees, but some risks were worth taking. The address Lorenzo had sent led Helen to a narrow brownstone in Little Italy, its windows glowing warmly against the darkness. Before she could lose her courage, she climbed the steps and knocked. Lorenzo opened the door immediately, as if he'd been waiting by the window. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair mussed, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Helen." Her name sounded like a prayer. "You shouldn't be here." Too late for that. Helen pushed past him into the apartment, then stopped short. The space was nothing like she'd expected. Instead of cold masculine minimalism, she found herself in a warm, lived-in home filled with family photos, Marco's toys scattered across expensive carpets, and the lingering scent of baby powder and coffee. "Where's Marco?" she asked. Sleeping upstairs. Sophia's with him." Lorenzo closed the door, then leaned against it as if blocking her exit. "She told you." It wasn't a question. Helen turned to face him, taking in his defensive posture, the wariness in his eyes. "She told me enough." "Then you know why this has to end before it really begins." "Do I?" Helen moved closer, watching him tense. "Because what I know is that you're a single father who loves his son. What I know is that you make me laugh, and you listen when I talk, and you kiss my hand like I'm something precious. I've killed people, Helen." The words came out flat, brutal. "I've ordered executions. I control territory through violence and intimidation. That's who I really am." Helen absorbed this, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest. "Okay, okay." Lorenzo stared at her incredulously. "That's it? Just okay?" "I asked Sophia the same question I'm going to ask you." Helen stepped closer, close enough to see the vulnerability he was trying to hide behind brutality. "Are you planning to hurt me?" "Never." "Are you planning to hurt Marco?" I'd die first. Then the rest is just details. Helen reached up to touch his face, feeling him tremble under her fingers. I'm not naive, Lorenzo. I know what you're telling me is serious, but I also know what I see when you're with your son. I know how you make me feel. That matters more than whatever you've done to survive. Lorenzo caught her hand, pressing it flat against his cheek. You don't understand what you're saying yes to. The danger, the scrutiny, the way people will look at you when they know who you belong to. Belong to? Helen raised an eyebrow. A ghost of his familiar smile appeared. Poor choice of words. When they know who you've chosen to love. Love, Helen repeated softly. Is that what this is? From the moment you took Marco in your arms on that plane. Lorenzo's voice was raw with honesty. I've never felt anything like this. Helen, it terrifies me more than any rival family ever could. Good, Helen said firmly. It should terrify you. Love is terrifying, but walking away from it is worse. Before Lorenzo could respond, a baby's cry echoed from upstairs. Both adults froze, listening. I'll get him, Sophia called down, her voice carrying relief at the interruption. She set this up, Lorenzo realized. The meeting bringing you here when Marco would be asleep upstairs. Your sister's very determined. It runs in the family. Lorenzo's arms came around Helen's waist, pulling her against him. Just like stubbornness and the inability to walk away from what we want. And what do you want? Helen asked, her hands fisting in his shirt. You, Marco. A life where I come home to both of you every night. He rested his forehead against hers. But that life comes with bodyguards and security cameras and the knowledge that loving me makes you a target. Then, we'll deal with it together. Helen, no. She silenced him with a finger against his lips. I've made my choice. The question is whether you trust me enough to let me make it. Lorenzo stared down at her for a long moment, and Helen could see him wrestling with protective instincts and desperate longing. Finally, slowly, he nodded. There are rules, he said seriously. Non-negotiables if you're going to be part of this life. Such as? You're never alone outside this house without security. You tell me everywhere you go. You trust my judgment about threats, even when it seems paranoid. Helen considered this. The loss of independence should have felt suffocating. Instead, knowing that someone cared enough to worry about her safety felt unexpectedly precious. Okay, but I have conditions too. Such as, you don't shut me out when things get dangerous. You don't make decisions about my life without consulting me. And you trust that I'm strong enough to handle whatever comes with loving you. Lorenzo's smile was slow and devastating. Deal. He kissed her then, soft and careful at first, then deeper, as Helen responded by pulling him closer. It was a kiss that tasted like promise and danger, and the beginning of everything that mattered. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Helena realized that her old life was officially over. Whatever came next would be complicated, possibly dangerous, definitely challenging. But as Marco's delighted giggle drifted down from upstairs and Lorenzo held her like she was his salvation, Helen knew she'd made the right choice. Love was worth the risk, even this love. So, she said breathlessly, when do I meet the family? Lorenzo's laugh was rich with relief and anticipation. Careful what you wish for, Tesoro. My family takes getting used to. Good thing I'm quick learner. And as Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs with a babbling, happy Marco reaching desperately for Helen, the three adults realized that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only one worth making. 3 weeks after Helen made her choice to love a Mafia boss, she found herself standing in the grand foyer of the Castellano family estate, clutching Marco's hand, while trying not to gape at the opulent surroundings. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched from gilt frames. They're going to love you, Lorenzo murmured against her ear, his hand warm on the small of her back. But Helen could feel the tension radiating from him despite his reassuring words. The dining room doors opened to reveal 15 people seated around a massive mahogany table. Conversations halted as Lorenzo guided Helen forward. Marco balanced on her hip like he belonged there. Family, Lorenzo's voice commanded immediate attention. I'd like you to meet Helen Parker, my fiancée. Helen's eyes widened. Fiancée? They'd never discussed marriage, but the weight of Lorenzo's grandmother's sharp gaze made her understand this wasn't the time for clarification. An elegant woman in her 70s rose from the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, diamonds glittering at her throat. So you're the flight attendant who's captured my grandson's heart. Nonna, Lorenzo warned quietly. I'm Rosa Castellano, the woman continued, approaching with the bearing of a queen. And you, child, are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Helen replied honestly, earning a surprised laugh from several family members. Rosa's stern expression cracked slightly. At least you're honest. Sit. Let's see what you're made of. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in family politics. Helen met Lorenzo's cousins who ran legitimate businesses that served as fronts, his uncle who handled family investments, and various members whose exact roles were diplomatically vague. Marco charmed everyone by refusing to sit anywhere but Helen's lap, babbling happily while she helped him eat. The baby approves, observed Lorenzo's cousin Elena, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. That's always a good sign. Marco has excellent judgment, Rosa agreed, studying how naturally Helen interacted with the child. Tell me, dear, what do you know about loyalty? The question hung in the air like a test. Helen looked around the table at faces that ranged from curious to skeptical, understanding that her answer would determine her acceptance or rejection. I know that loyalty is earned, not demanded, Helen said carefully. I know it means standing by someone even when it's difficult, and I know it's worthless if it's based on fear instead of choice. And you choose to be loyal to my grandson, knowing what that means. I choose to love him, Helen corrected gently. Loyalty follows love, not the other way around. Rosa's smile was approving. You'll do, child. You'll do just fine. As the evening wound down, Lorenzo walked Helen to her car, Marco asleep in his carrier. That went better than I expected, he admitted. Your family is intimidating but not unkind, Helen observed, though I feel like I'm still being evaluated. You are. It never really stops in this life. Lorenzo secured Marco's carrier in the back seat, then turned to face her. About the fiancé announcement, I figured that was for their benefit. Was it wrong? Assuming you'd want that eventually? His vulnerability was endearing. Helen rose on her toes to kiss him softly. Ask me properly sometime and find out. Lorenzo's smile was brilliant. Is that a yes to a future proposal? That's a maybe to a future conversation about a future proposal, Helen teased. Don't get ahead of yourself, Don Castellano. As she drove home, Helen felt cautiously optimistic. The family had accepted her, Marco was thriving, and Lorenzo seemed to be opening up more each day. For the first time since learning the truth about his business, she allowed herself to imagine a real future together. She had no idea that across town, a rival family was already planning to use her against the man she loved. Helen's first indication that her new life came with genuine danger arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of dead roses left outside her apartment door. 12 black roses tied with a white ribbon. No note necessary. The message was clear enough. Lorenzo arrived within minutes of her panicked phone call, his face grim as he examined the flowers. Behind him, 2 men in dark suits positioned themselves strategically around her building's entrance. Pack a bag, Lorenzo said without preamble. You're staying at the estate until we handle this. Handle what exactly? Helen demanded, though she was already moving toward her bedroom. Who would do this? The Torino family. They've been quiet for months, rebuilding after we took their territory in the docks. This is them announcing they're ready to play again. Lorenzo's voice was ice-cold. Nothing like the gentle father she'd grown to love. And they're targeting you to get to me. Why me specifically? Lorenzo's jaw clenched. Because they know I care about you. Because hurting you would hurt me more than any business loss ever could. Helen paused in her packing, the reality of her situation hitting with full force. This is what you meant about danger, isn't it? This isn't theoretical anymore. No, it's not. Lorenzo moved to her window, scanning the street below. Vincent and Carlo will escort you to the estate. I'll follow after I meet with my lieutenants. What kind of meeting? The kind where we decide how to respond to threats against my family. The word family sent warmth through Helen's chest despite the circumstances. She was part of his family now, which meant she was both protected and targeted. The estate felt different when Helen arrived with her hastily packed suitcase. What had seemed luxurious before now revealed itself as a fortress. Security cameras, armed guards, and protocols that transformed quickly into lockdown mode. Sophia met them at the door. Marco balanced on her hip. Welcome to Family Crisis Management, she said grimly. I've prepared the blue guest room. It has the best sight lines and reinforced windows. Reinforced windows? Helen repeated. Standard precaution, Sophia replied matter-of-factly. Marco's nursery has them too. We don't take chances with family. That evening, Helen found herself in the bizarre situation of playing peekaboo with Marco while armed guards patrolled outside. The normalcy of the baby's laughter contrasted sharply with the tension radiating from every adult in the house. Lorenzo returned after midnight, his expression dark. He found Helen in the kitchen, unable to sleep, warming milk for Marco, who'd been fussy. "How bad is it?" she asked without turning around. "Bad enough." Lorenzo's arms came around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Angelo Torino wants to negotiate." "That sounds good. In our world, negotiations often end with someone not walking away." Lorenzo's voice was carefully controlled. "He wants to meet tomorrow night, neutral territory." Helen turned in his arms, studying his face. "You're going." "I have to. And if it's a trap, then my men know what to do." Lorenzo cupped her face gently. "This is who I am, Helen. This is what loving me means. Sleepless nights and constant worry, and the knowledge that every choice I make could have deadly consequences." Helen absorbed this, feeling the weight of their reality settle around them. "What do you need from me?" "Stay here, stay safe, take care of Marco if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Nothing's going to happen to you," Helen said fiercely. "I refuse to let it." Lorenzo's smile was sad. "You can't control this, Tesoro. That's the hardest part of this life, accepting that some things are beyond your influence." "Then we'll face whatever comes together," Helen replied. "After tomorrow, whatever happens, we deal with it as a family." Lorenzo kissed her then, desperate and claiming, as if memorizing the taste of her lips. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," he whispered against her forehead. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that." "Nothing's going to happen," Helen repeated. But even as she said it, she could feel the cold fingers of fear tracing down her spine. Tomorrow night would change everything. Helen spent the day of Lorenzo's meeting in a state of controlled panic. She helped Sophia with Marco, played in the garden under the watchful eyes of security, and tried to pretend her heart wasn't hammering against her ribs every time she checked the clock. At 6 p.m., Lorenzo appeared in the nursery doorway wearing a perfectly tailored black suit and an expression that belonged on marble statues. He looked every inch the dangerous Don, powerful, untouchable, and utterly lethal. "You look terrifying," Helen observed, settling Marco into his crib for the night. "Good, that's the point." Lorenzo moved to stand beside her, both of them watching the baby settle into sleep. "If something happens tonight—" "Stop!" Helen pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me like this is the end." "Helen—" "No, you're coming home. We're going to have breakfast tomorrow morning. And Marco's going to throw cereal at both of us, and you're going to complain about him getting food in your hair." Her voice was fierce with determination. "That's what's happening tomorrow." Lorenzo's smile was genuine for the first time all day. "I love your certainty. Then trust it." Helen rose on her toes to kiss him, putting everything she felt into the connection. "Come home to us." "Always," Lorenzo promised against her lips. "For both of you. Always." After he left, Helen tried to distract herself with dinner, television, a book. Nothing worked. At 10 p.m., Sophia found her pacing the living room, wearing a groove in the expensive carpet. "Sit," Sophia commanded, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "Pacing won't bring him home faster." "How do you stand it?" Helen accepted the wine gratefully. "The waiting, the not knowing?" "Years of practice," Sophia admitted, "and the knowledge that Lorenzo is very good at what he does. He survived this long by being smart, careful and absolutely ruthless when necessary." "Ruthless," Helen repeated, tasting the word. "I keep forgetting that side of him." "Don't," Sophia said seriously. "The man who reads bedtime stories and the man who orders executions are the same person. You have to love all of him or none of him." At midnight, Helen's phone buzzed with a text from Lorenzo. "Meeting going longer than expected. Don't wait up." "That's good, right?" Helen showed Sophia the message. If it was going badly, he wouldn't text. "Maybe," Sophia replied, but her expression was troubled. "Lorenzo's meetings don't usually go past 11. He likes to be home for Marco's late feeding." 1 a.m. came and went, then 2. At 3 a.m., Helen was seriously considering calling in a missing person report when the front door finally opened. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, and Helen's heart nearly stopped. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt torn and blood-stained, his left hand wrapped in what looked like a kitchen towel. "It's not my blood," were his first words, seeing her expression. Whose blood is it? Helen demanded, helping him to the kitchen where Sophia was already assembling a first aid kit. Angelo Torino's. The negotiation got creative. Sophia began unwrapping Lorenzo's hand, revealing scraped knuckles and what looked like defensive wounds. What happened to keeping it civilized? He brought twice the agreed number of men and tried to dictate terms that would have cost us everything. Lorenzo winced as Sophia cleaned the cuts. It became clear that negotiation was never his real intention. So you fought your way out? Helen tried to keep the admiration out of her voice. We sent a message about the consequences of betraying agreements. Lorenzo's smile was sharp. Angelo won't be making that mistake again. Is he dead? The question slipped out before Helen could stop it. No, but he'll be eating through a straw for a while. Lorenzo studied her face carefully. Does that bother you? Helen considered the question honestly. A month ago, the idea of Lorenzo hurting someone would have horrified her. Now, knowing that someone had threatened their family, she found herself feeling grimly satisfied. No, she admitted, it doesn't. Is that wrong? It's survival, Sophia said approvingly. Welcome to the family, Helen. Really welcome this time. As Sophia finished bandaging Lorenzo's hand, Helen helped him out of his ruined shirt, cataloguing bruises and scrapes that spoke of a violent encounter. Each mark made her angrier at the men who'd tried to hurt him. Tomorrow there will be retaliation, Lorenzo said as they headed upstairs. The Torinos won't let this stand unanswered. What kind of retaliation? The kind that makes tonight look like a conversation. Lorenzo's expression was grim. This war isn't over, Helen. It's just beginning. In their bedroom, as Helen helped him into clean clothes, Lorenzo caught her hands in his bandaged ones. You could still walk away, he said quietly, before this gets worse, before the violence escalates. Helen looked at this man she'd fallen so desperately in love with, bruised, bloodied, dangerous, and devoted. Do you want me to walk away? Never. Then stop asking. Helen kissed his injured knuckles gently. We're in this together now, all of it. As they settled into bed, Marco's soft breathing audible through the baby monitor, Helen realized that she'd crossed another line tonight. She wasn't just loving a Mafia boss anymore. She was becoming someone who belonged in his world. The attack came at dawn 3 days later, swift and brutal. Helen woke to the sound of gunfire and Lorenzo's urgent voice shouting orders. Before she could fully process what was happening, he was pulling her from the bed, his face grim in the early morning light. Basement, now! Lorenzo's voice was pure command as he grabbed Marco from his crib, the baby still half asleep and confused. Take him and don't come up no matter what you hear. Lorenzo, what? Torino's men are here. Multiple entry points. He thrust Marco into Helen's arms as more gunfire erupted from somewhere in the house. There's a safe room in the basement. Sophia knows the code. Sophia appeared in the doorway, already dressed and carrying a pistol like she knew how to use it. This way, she ordered Helen. Stay low, move fast. Helen's training as a flight attendant kicked in. Remain calm in emergencies. Follow safety protocols. Protect those in your care. She clutched Marco tightly, the baby now crying from the noise and confusion, and followed Sophia through the house. They made it to the basement as explosions rocked the floor above. Sophia quickly entered a code into what Helen had assumed was a wine cellar door, revealing a reinforced room with security monitors, communication equipment, and enough supplies for a siege. Welcome to our panic room, Sophia said grimly, securing the door behind them. We've had to use it more often than I'd like. On the monitors, Helen could see armed men in black tactical gear moving through the house while Lorenzo's security team engaged them. The violence was swift and efficient, nothing like the stylized gunfights in movies. This was brutal, desperate, and terrifying. Where's Lorenzo? Helen demanded, scanning the feeds. There. Sophia pointed to a monitor showing the main staircase. Lorenzo moved with deadly precision, a pistol in each hand, his injured hand apparently not slowing him down. He looked like a completely different person. From the gentle father she knew, this was the Don his enemies feared. He's outnumbered, Helen observed, watching 3 men converge on Lorenzo's position. He's survived worse. But Sophia's knuckles were white where she gripped the communication panel. Come on, little brother, she whispered. Don't be a hero. The battle lasted 20 minutes that felt like hours. Helen watched in horrified fascination as Lorenzo's world revealed its true nature, violent, unforgiving, and absolutely ruthless. Men she'd met at family dinners fought with military precision, protecting their don and their territory with their lives. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence was deafening. "Lorenzo," Sophia's voice cracked slightly as she tried the communication system. "Lorenzo, respond." Static answered them. "Something's wrong," Sophia said, already moving toward the door. "He always checks in immediately after an engagement." "Don't." Helen caught her arm. "He told us to stay here. That was when we didn't know if he was alive." Sophia's expression was fierce with family loyalty. "I'm not leaving my brother." Before Helen could argue, voices echoed through the house speakers, Lorenzo's security team conducting a room-by-room clear. Finally, Lorenzo's voice came through the comm system, rough but alive. "All clear. Basement team. Report." Sophia grabbed the microphone. "We're secure." "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious. Coming to you now." When Lorenzo appeared in the safe room doorway 10 minutes later, Helen nearly cried with relief. He was covered in dust and sporting a cut across his cheekbone, but he was alive and whole. Marco reached for his father immediately, seeming to sense that the danger had passed. Lorenzo gathered both his son and Helen into his arms, holding them like they were his salvation. "It's over," he murmured against Helen's hair. "They're gone." "All of them?" Sophia asked. "Angelo won't be ordering any more attacks." Lorenzo's voice was flat, final. "The Torino family is finished." Helen understood what he wasn't saying. Angelo Torino was dead, along with anyone who'd followed him here. The violence she'd witnessed on the monitors had been a war, and Lorenzo had won decisively. "What happens now?" Helen asked, as they made their way back upstairs, surveying the damage to Lorenzo's beautiful home. "Now we rebuild. Stronger security, better protocols." Lorenzo's hand found hers as they stepped over debris in the hallway. "And we make sure everyone knows the cost of threatening this family." "Helen," Sophia said quietly as they reached the main floor, "you did well today. Staying calm, protecting Marco, following orders. That's not easy during your first family war." "My first?" Helen looked between Lorenzo and Sophia. "And you think there'll be more?" "There's always another ambitious family looking to take what we've built," Lorenzo explained. "That's the price of power in our world. Constant vigilance." Helen nodded, absorbing this reality. As they surveyed the damaged house, broken windows, bullet holes in the walls, bloodstains on the marble floors, she realized something profound had shifted inside her. She wasn't horrified by the violence anymore. She was proud of how Lorenzo had protected them, grateful for the loyalty of his men, and grimly satisfied that the threat had been eliminated. "I need to make some calls," Lorenzo said, kissing Helen's forehead. "Let the other families know how this war ended. Make sure there are no misunderstandings about consequences." As he walked away, phone already in hand, Helen understood that she'd crossed the final line. She wasn't just in love with a mafia boss anymore, she was thinking like one. 6 months after the Torino War ended, Helen stood in the nursery of their new home, a fortress disguised as a family estate with better security and higher walls. Marco, now 18 months old, was taking his first real steps, tottering between Helen and Lorenzo with pure joy on his cherubic face. "Mama, Papa!" Marco called out, the words finally clear and deliberate. He'd been saying mama for Helen since he turned one, and neither adult had the heart to correct him. "Did you hear that?" Lorenzo scooped up his giggling son, spinning him around. "He said, Papa, my brilliant boy." Helen's heart was full watching them together. Lorenzo had officially adopted her into the family 3 months ago, in a ceremony that was part wedding, part coronation. She wore his ring now, a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds, and bore his name legally. "Mrs. Castellano," Lorenzo had whispered against her lips after the ceremony. "How does it feel to be a mafia wife?" "Terrifying and perfect," Helen had answered honestly. Now as she watched her husband and son play together in the safest room of their carefully protected world, Helen reflected on how completely her life had transformed. She'd gone from a flight attendant living paycheck to the wife of Chicago's most powerful crime boss, and somehow it felt like coming home. A knock at the nursery door interrupted her thoughts. Vincent, now head of their personal security, appeared with his usual professional deference. "Don Castellano, the commission meeting is in an hour." Lorenzo's expression immediately shifted to business mode. The commission, leaders of the 5 major families, met quarterly to discuss territory, resolve disputes, and maintain the delicate balance of power that kept Chicago from erupting into open warfare. Any word on the Romano situation? Lorenzo asked, settling Marco into his playpen with practiced ease. They've accepted your terms. Full territorial concession in exchange for peaceful transition. Helen had learned to read between the lines of such conversations. The Romano family had been making noise about expanding into Castellano territory. Lorenzo had made a counteroffer they couldn't refuse, likely involving either significant financial incentives or barely veiled threats. Good. Helen, I'll be back for dinner. Sophia's bringing her new boyfriend to meet us. The doctor from New York? Helen smiled. Sophia had been glowing during their recent phone calls, clearly smitten with her surgeon. The same. Fair warning. I may terrorize him a little. It's traditional. After Lorenzo left with his security detail, Helen settled into the routine that had become her new normal. Marco's afternoon nap, followed by her work managing the family's legitimate business investments. Lorenzo had been surprised to discover her degree in business management and had put her natural talents to good use. She was reviewing quarterly reports for their restaurant chain when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check the news, Channel 7. Helen's blood ran cold. Unknown numbers were never good news in their world. She turned on the television, her heart hammering as the local news came into focus. Federal agents conducted coordinated raids this morning on suspected organized crime operations across Chicago, the reporter announced. While no arrests have been made, sources indicate this may be part of a larger investigation into, the report continued, but Helen had heard enough. Federal investigation meant wiretaps, surveillance, possible indictments. It meant their carefully constructed life was under threat from enemies they couldn't simply eliminate. Her phone rang immediately. Lorenzo's voice was tense but controlled when she answered. You saw the news. Is it serious? Potentially. I'm coming home. We need to discuss contingencies. Helen understood what that meant. Contingencies in their world included everything from hidden offshore accounts to new identities, from safe houses to emergency relocations. When Lorenzo arrived an hour later, his expression was grim. He found Helen in the living room, Marco playing contentedly at her feet, seemingly oblivious to the tension radiating from both adults. How bad is it? Helen asked without preamble. Bad enough that we need to be prepared. Lorenzo sat beside her on the couch, automatically reaching for Marco when the toddler crawled over. The feds have been building a case for months. Today was them showing us they're serious. A case against you specifically? Against the entire organization? RICO charges, racketeering, the works? Lorenzo's voice was carefully neutral, but Helen could see the worry in his eyes. If they have enough evidence, they'll move to arrests within weeks. Helen felt the ground shifting beneath them again. Just when she'd found stability and happiness, the outside world threatened to tear it all apart. What do? We prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Lorenzo shifted Marco to his lap, the baby immediately settling against his father's chest. Our lawyer says the evidence is mostly circumstantial. They need someone to flip, to testify against the family structure. Would anyone do that? In our world, betrayal is usually a death sentence, but federal pressure can make people desperate. Lorenzo met her eyes. Helen, if this goes badly, if I'm arrested... Stop! Helen moved closer, taking his free hand. We've been through this before. Whatever happens, we face it together. Even if together means visiting me in federal prison, raising Marco alone while his father serves life without parole. The questions hung in the air like a challenge. Helen looked at this man who'd transformed her life completely, who'd shown her depths of love and loyalty she'd never imagined possible. She thought about their son, not biologically hers, but hers in every way that mattered. She thought about the family that had embraced her, the life they'd built in spite of constant danger. Yes, she said simply. Even then, especially then. Lorenzo's smile was brilliant despite the circumstances. How did I get so lucky? Good timing and a crying baby on an airplane, Helen replied, earning his laugh. No regrets about falling in love with a criminal? Only one. Helen leaned over to kiss him softly. I wish I'd met you sooner. As they sat together in their beautiful, dangerous home, watching their son play innocently at their feet, Helen realized that her answer was completely true. Whatever came next, federal trials, prison sentences, forced relocations, she regretted nothing about choosing this complicated, perilous, absolutely extraordinary love. 3 hours later, news broke that the federal investigation had been compromised by prosecutorial misconduct. All evidence was being thrown out, All charges dropped. The investigation was over before it truly began. "How?" Helen asked, as Lorenzo celebrated with a glass of expensive whiskey. "Sometimes justice works in mysterious ways," Lorenzo replied with a smile that told her everything she needed to know about the family's reach and influence. As they tucked Marco into his crib that night, both parents watching their son sleep peacefully, Helen marveled at the life they'd built together. It was built on dangerous foundations, surrounded by constant threats, and maintained through methods she still didn't fully understand. It was also filled with more love, loyalty, and genuine happiness than she'd ever dreamed possible. "Thank you," Lorenzo whispered as they settled into their own bed. "For what?" "For getting on that plane, for helping a stranger with a crying baby, for choosing to stay when you learned the truth." Lorenzo pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "For giving me a family worth protecting." "Thank you for letting me love you both," Helen replied, "even when it was dangerous." Especially because it was dangerous. As Chicago glittered outside their bulletproof windows and their son slept safely in his reinforced nursery, Helen drifted off to sleep in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. She'd never felt safer in her life. The flight attendant who'd simply wanted to help a crying baby had become a Mafia wife, a mother, and the center of a powerful man's world, and she wouldn't change a single dangerous, complicated, absolutely perfect moment of it.